Hello everyone, welcome to Uncle Iroh's Tea Shop. For today's Avatar video, we are going to be exploring the next comic that I got the chance to read for the first time, and this one is called The Rift. It is a sequel story taking place after the comic The Search, which was the second comic that I read and reviewed on this channel, and we are continuing along with its story here now. I thought that this one was decent. It gives some interesting lore expansion to the world, some more fun moments with our characters, but also importantly, some very interesting themes and conversations that are the big reason why I think this comic is important. Sit back, relax, and enjoy some jasmine tea as we run through this comic analysis video. So like I said, it is a sequel taking place after the last two comics, The Promise and The Search, where our gang and the world are getting accustomed to what it's like after the war ended, but also following the story of Zuko and Azula trying to find their mother Ursa. This comic follows a more separated story from all of that. It is a lot more similar to the past two in terms of world building and character development, which I do like. The story follows Aang and the gang, minus Zuko, as they prepare for what is called Yangchen's festival, an Air Nomad holiday that hasn't been celebrated in over a century. Aang gets cryptic visits from the spirit of Yangchen because of this. He soon finds out that there is a reason for this, as he gets to go and visit the place where they normally celebrate it, only to find that a refinery is operating on that sacred land, polluting it. This leads them to a very dangerous encounter with a malevolent spirit bent on destroying everyone because of the destruction that has been caused to that sacred land. That is the overall premise of this comic, but there is much more to the story once you dive deep into it with regards to the characters. That is something that I really liked about this comic, and it is what we are going to focus on a lot when breaking it down, so I hope you don't mind if I jump all over the place when discussing things. So the first thing that I did want to discuss is the characters and their development, because like the last two comics, there is an emphasis on making sure that they are now developing in a newer world that is unlike what they were dealing with for the last year or so at the time when the war was still happening. I think that there is a good conflict within this comic storyline that helps to enable that to a degree where you see these characters grow. I think that particularly in this comic comes from Toph and Aang. They are the ones who seemingly butt heads in this story, and that is where the conflict comes from. In a way, not to be on the nose, but they do have a bit of a rift between each other where we do see them disagree on things and then ultimately fight each other at one point within the comic. The rift basically comes from the fact that they fundamentally disagree on the ideals and traditions of what it means to look back on the past as opposed to focusing on the present. It is something neither of these two characters could explore between each other back in the original cartoon because they didn't have the ability to do so with the war going on. Now that the world is changing back to a time of peace, you are starting to see things come out of our gang that we didn't see beforehand, and I like that the comic tackles that. Aang is someone who is a man of tradition given what he wants to do with his festival, but Toph sees things differently in a way that connects with her past as a kid. She doesn't like dwelling on the past of what was and thinks focusing on the future is what is needed. I like that this connects in with the events of the comic when you see that Aang has to communicate with the past avatars to learn about what came before and how it's meant to progress him in the present. And then you have Toph, who sees her father for the first time post-war and how he's changed to where even those characters have a rift with each other. You can almost kind of call this comic The Reflection as well, along with it being called The Rift. These characters find themselves at odds with one another, and then the resolution comes in at the end when they do come back to seeing eye to eye. Speaking to Toph's story, I feel it is one of understanding, but also truth. The understanding comes from the fact that she has this rift between her and her family that made her parents split up with each other, and caused her father to not see her as his daughter anymore. We see families go through these kinds of things all the time in entertainment media. I think that Toph needed this in order for us to help better understand what her life was like during the war when we couldn't have had a chance to explore it, as I said earlier. It is a dramatic aspect to the story, but it is also one that is a relatable thing that I think is why it might come off to a lot of readers in a good way if, say, their favorite character was Toph and they related to this aspect of her life. This signifies her conflict within the story. She's not about the past, but all about what is happening in the present now. This seemingly is the opposite with Aang, where his focus on the past comes from wanting to celebrate this festival around Yangchen. Because the 100-year war prevented it from being celebrated for so long, he's basically attached to the idea that he has to do it and respect Air Nomad traditions. Unfortunately, this tradition is being blocked out by the refinery that is on this sacred land where they always celebrate it. Because this festival hadn't been celebrated for so long and the war took over the world, things changed and people gravitated into this area and started doing work on it with this refinery that is polluting the river and taking up the ground by mining it. Aang doesn't like this and thinks that it needs needs to go away, especially when you factor in that it is preventing him from speaking to Yang Chen. I think what also makes this storyline even more interesting, at least for me, is that I actually see both sides but understand Aang's even more than Toph's, because at least with Aang, the guy has to deal with a giant spirit that's going to come and destroy the land even more, which we'll talk about in a second. That spirit goes by the name of General Old Iron, and this is where we get into something that I really did love about the comic, which is having a cool world building and lore aspect to it through the storytelling of Yang Chen's past as the Avatar. During her time as Avatar, one of her first assignments was to go to a city where the fortune tellers there predicted that a tragedy was about to occur. That tragedy would be the presence of this spirit named General Old Iron that was coming to destroy the city because the city had killed another spirit who is the friend of General Old Iron named Tienhai. He believes that humanity was such a detriment to the spirits that there is no world for them there when the humans were doing what they did. I find this to be such an insightful look on how the world of Avatar worked with regards to the spirit aspect of it. Before General Old Iron could destroy the city, Yang Chen pleaded with him to stop by making a deal that he promised he would never take up his armor against humankind, and in return, she would build a statue in memorial to Lady Tienhai. She also promised that the land would return to its natural state, free of human civilization, and that it would be a sign that humans are capable of preserving and protecting. Unfortunately, that agreement did not last long because of what the 100-Year War had done to the land, to where, after the war ended, this refinery that is the basis for this conflict between our characters was built and was destroying the sacred land. This is a classic and cliche case of humans do bad things and so they must be punished for it plotline that personally I think works. I don't blame General Old Iron at all. He lost his spirit friend to the humans, and then over time, even after Yang Chen promised him nothing bad would come of the land, even that went away, and so he felt betrayed even more. He had every reason to be angry about it, which is what led us to the end of this comic here, where Aang and Toph actually fight him. Aang has a connection with the Lady Tienhai spirit with a great message, as she tells him that she was the caretaker of this place once before. It was under her watch during a time when a group of humans built a magnificent city. After her and General Old Iron split up from each other, once a year she would take the form of a human for a night and stroll through the streets. One of the nights that she visited the city's prince, she was interested in him so much that she accepted her human form as permanent, and they got married while he became king, and they lived in happiness for years. When she died, the king blamed himself, and he believed he seduced her into giving up her original immortal form. She explains that she didn't actually die, she just took on a new form. She said that she believes that Old Iron was wrong about what he said, in that it is not human nature to dominate, but to create. She says that even though in the past humans have made mistakes and have failed, it doesn't mean that they can't learn from them and grow to create a civilization that will preserve and protect even as it grows. The spirits will always have a place in the world as long as humans will create one for them to live in. Aang asks her how she is sure that they can do it, and she tells him that she doesn't know, but that she can only hope. This is a very good monologue that is insightful and also deep in its themes and plays into the next part of the ending. As the fight between Old Iron and Aang and Toph goes on, it gets to a point where Aang gets one up on Old Iron with a big hit and knocks him down enough to where Old Iron gives up and dies on his own accord. Again, I could feel for this spirit. He may not have had the best intentions with wanting to harm people, but I understood his pain. It gives a whole new meaning to the world building and lore of spirits and what they've been doing throughout this world. I think that Aang, in the moment of after Old Iron died, realized that, and that is why I also liked that they included in a scene right after this where he and Toph make up for all the stuff that they went through in this adventure. I think this comic's ending had a profound meaning to it based on that title of The Rift. People are going to pull apart from each other, whether it's because they see things differently or a promise that wasn't kept gets broken, and that also tears them apart. Eventually, though, over time, you might see those people come back together in a mutual understanding and realize that friendship is more than just the promises you keep and the ideals that you agree or disagree on. Toph and Aang have had a long-lasting friendship with each other, and I think that in that moment at the end, they realized that as much, which is why I believe this comic is as big for that important reason. The reason being with what the comic represents through its message message and themes. When it comes to my final thoughts about the comic itself, I again think that it was a decent one, and maybe my least favorite of the first 3 here that I've read so far. It was cool to see some of the other new characters get introduced, like Satoru, the nephew to the man who runs the refinery, 2 old friends of Katara who came from the Southern Water Tribe to work at the refinery because things got bad after she left, and then even to seeing characters like the Rough Rhinos show up again with new members this time around. It was also nice to see Roku show back up after what happened in the first comic, where Aang severed the connection between the two. Roku is Aang's avatar, so I think making sure that those two are always on their connection is important. It brings in those ideals of coming back to someone that you had a disagreement with and making up for it. Aang and Yangchen had a conversation about this very thing, with the idea of what it means to cling onto the past. Yangchen offers the idea that she and the other past avatars are not meant to be things that Aang should always follow, but they can always be there as a guide. With that in mind, he cannot separate himself from them, because if he does, he'll just be making the same mistakes that they all made in their pasts. Toph's metal bending school seems to also be getting bigger, as we see that her students show up to help in the conflict, and overall, I'm glad that she was included in this story when she wasn't in the last one. I would have also been curious to know what this story would have been like if Zuko was involved, but he was off helping his mother get acquainted back in the Fire Nation capital. I think for the most part, the spirit stuff with Old Iron, Yangchen, the rift between Aang and Toph, and whatnot is what grabbed me the most in this comic. I didn't truly care as much for all the other stuff that, while important, it just didn't hit me as hard. I think this comic also was the least funny of the first 3. I guess for me, it's just so different reading humor off a page versus hearing it through the voice actors on screen. The jokes feel a little bit more kiddish, and I think it makes a lot of scenes a little too silly, and sometimes I can get pulled out. I love how also, for myself, repeatedly find that there is something within the characters of this world and franchise that make me really wish my life was like this in the real world as a kid, or even now as an adult. Like, straight up, there are parts of these stories with these characters where I'm like, I want to be like these people, and I wish the friendships that they had were similar to what I had for myself in the real world. Finally, like I said already, the main thing that I enjoyed about this comic the most was the world building, spirit stuff, and the exploration of its themes and messages, which Avatar has always been known for with what it does best, and I'm glad that they continued it here in this story. As we end off the video, everyone, please comment down below your thoughts on this video and my commentary of this comic. If you read it before already, do let me know what you thought about it. If you did enjoy the video and you want to see more like it, be sure to give it a like, and also subscribe to this channel if you are new here, and turn on that notification bell. Thank you all for stopping by Uncle Iroh's Tea Shop. I hope everyone here has a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you all soon for more Avatar.